Okay. All right. This is a 10-minute training, which is a little bit of a misnomer because nobody can generally get through them in 10 minutes because they generate so much discussion. So this one focuses on an exterior fire with extension to the interior. And in this case, it was complicated a little bit because the houses were built there's several houses. They were built very close together, and fire had extended to two houses before the arrival of the fire department. So that compounded the problem. And one of the key decisions in this is making a decision as to whether the fire presents defensive fire conditions, or whether it's a working fire, whether we're going to operate from the outside with a defensive strategy, establishing cutoff points, or whether we're going to go inside and try and stop the fire where it is. So this incident involved the fire in two small two-story houses on Cambridge Drive in North Salt Lake, Utah. The call came in at 16:50 in the afternoon on November 12th, 2017. And as we can see, looking at the map, that there were fire hydrants on either side of the incident. Houses very close together, very long row of houses that all were built in very close proximity. And there was access to both sides. It was a looped street, Cambridge Drive and Oxford Drive, both coming off North Cutler. So there was access on either side of the incident. So this shows an aerial view of the location, and you can see that the fire originated in a small shed immediately behind one of the houses, and because of its proximity, extended to both the house that owned the house of the people that own the shed, and also the house next door. Should have been the Delta 1 exposure. This is looking at it from with orientation similar to the map. Here's a view from side alpha. The two houses that were involved were separated by a narrow driveway. And have a view from above. View from the back with a little bit closer view of the shed. There was also a fence in between the house, and I'm not sure what that fence was made of, whether it was a wood fence or a PVC plastic fence. Not entirely sure. So the scenario we took from this to present to the firefighters is we've been dispatched to residential fire at 833 Cambridge Drive. Call reports a fire in a shed with extension to the exterior of the house. Again, with this, oftentimes this is a fairly straightforward job of kill the fire on the outside and then get in to check for extension. But this one got a little bit more complicated. Was presented as to the company officer or firefighter that was acting in capacity as a company officer with a crew of 3, responding from the east. Wind from the west-northwest at less than 10 miles an hour, so wind is not so much of a big factor, and that they're going to get another engine with a couple of firefighters 6 minutes after, and a command officer arriving about 2 minutes later. So do you want to just kind of walk through the questions, or do you want to jump into the middle of it?
No, I mean we just walk through the questions. Do you know the question about those houses? Like usually, what would you expect being the materials and the facades of those houses? What different options would you? would there be?
You mean for the outside?
Yeah, when the outside cladding of the houses.
Well, there's a couple of different possibilities. One would be wood siding. That would be fairly common. Another would be vinyl siding. Oftentimes vinyl siding over some foam insulation. And then the third option would be a cement board siding, which would certainly reduce the problem. But in this case, I would be suspecting most likely that it would be either wood or vinyl.
What would the rules be? Do you have to have like a concrete or cement siding if their houses are too close to each other, or would there be any rules, or it depends on which state you're in?
Depends on the jurisdiction, but given the way this incident progressed, I would suspect the answer is no.
Yeah, well, yeah. I looking at the pictures later, I would assume so too. At least I would consider. I would probably think it's vinyl siding.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Okay, so let's go ahead. Just jump in the first question.
So critical factors that you'd consider when dispatched and during response. Again, this is during the daytime. So we would likely suspect that the occupants would be awake and about, although that's not always the case. Having some familiarity with the community, we likely would know that this neighborhood has houses that are built very close together, so that would be a concern. That we've got hydrants that have fairly close spacing, so that's not too much of a concern. And those would probably be the big factors. Again, I would be thinking about wind, but in this case, the wind was not particularly significant.
Okay. Yeah. I don't have anything to add really.
And as far as assignments, again, fairly straightforward. The pump operator is the pump operator. The firefighter, if we decide we're going to drop a supply line coming in, then the firefighter would be at the hydrant at least until the hydrant was hooked up. And if not, then they would be in the nozzle position, and the officer would have their own role. So nothing particularly unusual in this particular case.
Well, and last discussion we had about like connecting hydrant before you move up to the house or not, and I was pushing for not connecting to hydrant. I thought that was someone else to do. But in this case, if I knew there was heavy fire, I would like to have the American system of a hose bed, so that you can just drop, at least like we discussed last time, drop that supply line, move further, so that you make it a lot easier for the next crew to connect it to a hydrant.
Yep.
In this case, I really agree with you, because in this case you're gonna need a lot of water fast.
Yep.
But again, that depends on exactly how that call is presented. But given that I would know how it looked when I arrived, I would really like to have the American system.
Yeah, and I think in this case, given the conditions that were presented, you likely are going to have some indication of what it is that's going on as soon as you are approaching the area of the incident. And definitely when you turn onto Cambridge Drive, you can see flames above the roof of the house. So I think in this case, you've got a pretty good warning that you've got a significant fire.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, got a video?
Yeah, here's the video of the. And this video appears to be shot just as the first company arrived. Stopping the video for a second. One of the things that kind of jumps out at me is that you've got some dark smoke starting to push from the attic space of the main fire occupancy. You don't see so much of that from exposure Delta 1. And on the second floor and the first floor of both of these houses, it doesn't appear that there's any smoke logging at all. So the fire at this point appears to be on the outside and possibly in the attic space of the main fire occupancy, and probably a little bit or soon to be in the attic space of the Delta 1.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. There's a lot of options here to go to what to actually do when you arrive here. That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
jump to the next question. What did you have?
So the next question for our guys is what their initial radio report is. So this sort of sets the stage for the rest of the story, because in this case, they've got small two-story houses. They've got to make a decision as to whether this is defensive fire conditions or a working fire, and then my suspicion, at least in the case of our guys, would be that they would do a forward lay and either be operating a master stream or an attack line from site alpha for fire control as their first choice. The challenge with the master stream, you could from the apparatus is you could probably do a pretty good job on the Delta 1 exposure, little bit on the main fire occupancy, but the majority of the fire is on the backside, on side Charlie of the main fire occupancy. So being able to get that, you're going to have to get a hand line around there to get water on that portion of the fire. But a master stream, while the officer is doing their 360-degree reconnaissance, at least for our first in engine, has a remotely operated master stream on top. So the pump operator, as soon as they get out, they could get that deployed and darken down some of that fire while the officer was doing their reconnaissance, and then stretch a hand line to get after the back side of it.
Yeah, I would love. I mean, the main problem, like you said, the main problem usually with the master stream on an engine and so on is angle of attack. You can only hit what you can see. Now, yep. That would be great to have in this situation because, like you said, you can at least knock down most of the D side exposure to the other house, and some of what you can see up on the attic. If you position your master stream basically in the middle of these two houses, yep. But then you have to get to a hand line, and Swedish fire departments, generally no fire trucks ever have master streams unless it's a tanker. Some tankers have master streams on them, but they're not often brought in the first response. They usually end up arriving a little bit later. So in Swedish perspective, this would be a handline operation, and I fear that if you're at this one, there will be someone pulling a booster line. But I hope the majority would at least pull the 42 millimeter, which is 1 3/4. But this is the case where I would like to see Swedish firefighters actually pulling the 70 millimeter and deploying that between the buildings, which is close to 2.5 inch, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that would be I would not see that as it would be hopefully the most unusual in this case would be the booster line, but I'm not so sure, sadly.
Yeah,
And,
I suspect that that if our guys decided to go with a hand line rather than a master stream, they probably would use the 2-inch hand line or 50 millimeter.
yeah.
Uh, Most our neighbors or other American fire departments would be likely to use a 2.5 or 64 mil line as the initial line on this, just to knock down that large bulk of fire as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I mean, you would only need I would rather flow, in this case, a very large amount of water, a very short time, than a smaller amount of water for a longer period of time.
Well, if it was a smaller amount of water, it would be a lot longer.
Oh yeah, it could be indefinitely.
And then the other part of the initial radio report, besides the usual element of establishing command and so forth, would be the resource determination. And in this case, basically you have 2 house fires, so doubling up on your resources would make sense. Calling a second alarm, possibly greater, depending upon what amount of resources you get in that second alarm.
It's interesting. I mean, go to the next question. Maybe that's jump to the next question, or maybe I'll go back. Yeah. So the specific act. I mean, just looking at the possibility of number of choices you can make. You can decide to make a search in either of those 2 houses, depending on the information you're getting, and ignoring the fire. That would be an option. Or you can go for attacking the fire on the exterior. That's I mean, to me, at least, that those are two of the main options you can go for. At least if you have reduced staffing, so you can only pick one of those.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say would be the advantages of going for search and rescue, and what would you say be the advantage of going for fire attack?
Well, I guess I'll start with the fire attack piece, because that would probably be my choice, barring some unusual circumstance. Is that if we don't get some water on the fire, things are going to get worse, and in fairly short order. It is in the daytime. There are people about. So one of the things that I would be doing would be trying to determine if any of those people that are outside are the occupants of these 2 houses, and if so, if all of the people are accounted for. Even with 3-person staffing, I probably would look at getting some water on the fire, even if my choice was to try and do a quick search to make sure that the people were out of the building, if I was unable to determine that by face-to-face conversation. Again, that's one of the advantages with the master stream, is that the pump operator can put that into operation, and the officer, as a part of their 360, can go to the door, bang on the door, holler inside to see if there's anybody in there. So if we begin with getting some water on the fire, that may buy us a little bit of time. If we need to search one of these houses again, it appears that there is no smoke on the 1st or 2nd floor, so a search of those occupancies would be pretty quick, as opposed to trying to do a search under smoke log conditions.
So, in my context, and I would say in the Swedish context, you would either have 2 main types of responses here. It would either be a single person, which could be a command vehicle, or it could be a volunteer vehicle that arrive first, and they basically don't have an option to go to fire attack here. I mean, a dry chem extinguisher won't do any good. You wouldn't even get close. So I would assume that they would do search and rescue in a certain sense, that checking if there's people inside by asking people, and then if they don't know, run in, as long as it's not too much smoke. It's just light haze maybe. But if there's any more than that, they can't go inside.
Without.
But they would establish that one. But if it was a response with 5 people, I would hope that they would commence both those two things. You would have fire attack with 1, or maybe I would probably pull 2 hand lines if I had that option, 2 hand lines, to try to control that fire, and then you have at least 1 firefighter and an officer left, and then you have the pump operator. But those 2 can start asking people, are there anyone inside, and do the quick run through of the houses to clear the areas. Because I'm looking at it, either it's clear of smoke, and there's probably no people inside, but we have to check anyway to see that they get out, because it could get worse. But either it's clear of smoke, or it's going to deteriorate really fast. Like when a window breaks at that facade or something else, the conditions would go from pretty good to really bad in a minute, or maybe maximum 2.
Well, and one of the things, and again, I'd have to go back and see if I can see in the, in at least excuse me, in at least the Delta 1 exposure, there's no windows in the wall facing the main fire occupancy.
Yeah.
And I would suspect that it's also quite possible that there's no windows in the other house facing the exposure Delta 1. Of course, there's no guarantee of that, and with the fire conditions, you may not be able to see that. But it appears right now that what you've got is an outside fire that's extended into the attic space. So the living space on floors 1 and 2 should be clear for at least a little while.
Yeah.
Definitely long enough for us to get a quick look and see if anybody is in there.
Oh, yeah, right.
And again,
in that case, it makes even more sense to start with fire attack.
Yeah.
If it were the case, because like you said, it's going to take a while then in that case for the fire to break through and become a hazard. So you have time to actually search that before it becomes a problem.
Mm-hmm. So the actions on the part of the company officer is going to be to determine, is there anybody in the house that we know of? Do we have any information about that? Again, as he's interacting with people coming out of the rig, getting around to the back side of this if he can, or if he can't, maybe around the opposite side and look over the fence just to see what's in the back of this. And again, this is where the fire originated, in that shed. So there's a place that's kind of shielded from direct application of water that's involved in fire. So definitely need to get a hand line around to the back if we're gonna have a good effect on that. Would you
try to push the hand line through between those buildings? Between the 2 fire buildings, or would you try to go around the buildings, given that the same obstacles would occur on both sides, maybe fences or no fences?
Yeah, I would say for us it would depend on whether or not we had declared the main fire occupancy as a defensive fire. If we had done that, then the walkway or the driveway in between is inside the collapse zone.
Yeah.
So in that case, we would need to stretch around to the side. If we had said, okay, this is a working fire in both houses, at least from a fire behavior and structural stability perspective, then going down the driveway would certainly be the shortest distance between 2 points. And I think that would be my inclination at this point, is to see, can we get in there and extinguish that fire that's on the outside, because until we've gotten a handle on that, then we're not going to be able to effectively deal with the fire that's on the inside.
Yeah, I agree. I would generally, looking at what I've seen, I will probably try to push. Given my context, maybe I will commit 2 inch and 3/4 lines through that center and have them pretty much assigned to one to exposure and one to to well, one for each house.
Mm-hmm.
Those probably would be my initial way of saying, and see if they can get through that driveway alley in the middle, and get actually water on the Charlie side.
And I suspect that the answer to that would be yes, given the level of involvement that's there, and the fact that if you can get the hand lines into that driveway, the amount of water that it's going to take to control that outside fire is not particularly large, as long as we can put the water on the burning fuel.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think it's if you get through that alley, you would have a good angle eventually, and it's gonna you work your way from the bottom and work your way up. I don't think that's going to be a problem to knock the bulk of that fire down.
So as far as modifying the assignments given to the crew, there's only three of us. So for us, it would be one hand line, probably a 50 millimeter or 2-inch hand line, and I would not at this point modify the assignments given to them. It sort of comes down to question 7, which is what assignment would I give the next company? And this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting, because now we have to make a decision. If we're gonna shift from exterior operations to operating from the interior, then the question comes down to which house. And I've got to make a choice. If I was successful at darkening the fire on the outside of the Delta 1 exposure, and it appears that I don't have any significant extension there, then maybe I choose the main fire occupancy and try and get up and deal with that attic fire. If it appears that I have fire extension into the attic space of both houses, whether I'm going to choose to place fog nails in the roof, or whether I'm going to choose to go inside and work from below. In either case, I don't have enough people yet to deal with both of these at the same time. So I'm going to have to pick.
Yeah, and it's hard to say from that point. You would have to. So when you knock down the fire at the D side exposure, that could probably make, if you feel like, well, you don't think that it's gone into the attic yet, that would make it a very easy choice.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's gone into the attic, you suspect it's gone into the attic of the D side, that is a hard choice. Luckily, usually in the Swedish context, you would have 5 persons in there, and then you can have, if you've committed to hand lines and controlling the exposure, and the people that's left that they've established that both occupancies are empty, there's no smoke in them yet. Again, if I have the ability to pull one of the hand lines and then commit one fog nail, or at least water mist in some form, up into the attic space, just to slow it down. And I would try to go from the interior to start with, because if I go from the interior, and the occupancy is smoke free, or at least mostly smoke free, you can deploy that fog nail or piercing nozzle with just one firefighter. Of dry stretching that hose up into the top floor, make it a little bit of loop, and then pressurizing it and put it up through a hatch or something in the attic, to just slow it down, to buy yourself time. That would be definitely my next step. But again, I don't know which of those houses I would prefer. Maybe I would, if I deem the main occupancy to be very heavily involved and very damaged in the attic structure, I might go for the exposure house and put a fog nail in there, just to make sure that doesn't start to exponentially grow.
Yeah, again, one of the challenges that this presents, again, these are both wood houses with truss roofs and so forth, and wooden roof systems. So if you decide on the exposure delta 1 and not the main fire occupancy, then the next thing we have to be thinking about is how long is it before the main fire occupancy threatens exposure Bravo 1.
Yeah.
So if we were to say that given the limited resources that we have, we're going to deal with the attic fire in the delta 1 exposure, and we're going to treat the main fire occupancy as a defensive fire, then we need to establish a cutoff point between the main fire occupancy and the Bravo 1 exposure. So that's not horribly difficult in this instance. I mean, we need to just stretch a hand line over there, and even if that hand line is not staffed at this point, it needs to be in place so that if we start to get fire coming out that end of the attic, that we can stop it from extending to the other building.
Is it? It's not very common, but there are like hose lines you put out that have basically sprinkler heads in them in Sweden. Have you seen those?
Yeah.
It's like a. Do you use that kind of hose lines in the United States?
Not generally. I mean, they exist. I've seen them in some places, but sort of a water curtain type of thing. For us, we've got a small ground level master stream that's on the back of the rig that has a flow range from 100 to 500 gallons a minute, and more than likely that's what we would use in between those two, because it can be, while not recommended, it can be left unattended, and the apparatus operator could run that at low flow just to keep water on the side of that exposure should fire start to come out that other side.
Yeah, I mean, too bad, but in Sweden, ground monitors are also very, very rare. Too bad. They're great pieces of equipment for a lot of reasons.
I mean, and this the neat thing about this one is that if in an application like this, you could run it at 100 gallons a minute, or 370 some odd liters per minute, because it's not going to take a whole bunch of water, at least not at the beginning of it, and you could increase the flow rate should it be necessary.
Yeah. How the one you have, how much can you flow if you position it in, like, sort of optimally, before you have to actually weigh it down with a person, or like man it with someone?
Well, the neat thing is if it tilts off horizontal, it shuts off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's got a auto shut off.
Yeah. So I wouldn't worry about it up to probably 200 or 300 gallons a minute. If you take it to its maximum capacity, and you were operating it at a low angle, I would be concerned. But if it was not at a low angle, I would be a lot less concerned, since most of the force is going into the ground.
Yeah. No, they're great pieces of equipment, and again, I think they're very uncommon in Sweden. I think that's a problem, or at least that's a way of improving. Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of departments maybe don't have an issue saying that, well, we can deal with both houses at the same time. But I would say that in Sweden, we also have a problem here. But we could at least, well, at least in theory, it's going to take some time. But you could knock in a fog nail in the first attic, and then run over and knock in a fog nail in the second attic to buy yourself time. You can leave them flowing. It would create a lot of water damages when you have just a flowing water in the attic. But in the main exposure, you would just have to deal. You would just have to take that as a consequence.
Yeah, and again, I think the thing is a lot of the decision process is going to depend on what is it that you see once you knock
Yeah.
the exterior down. In this case, again, the thing is that the fire is outside and in the attic. It's not in the main portion of the house. But the challenge that the guys at this incident faced and that we would face is simply you have a very small number of people to work with. It's kind of like that first arriving engine in Sweden with 5 guys. You don't really have enough to do all of the things that need to be done, so there's some sort of compromise that's going to have to be made. Again, I think a lot of that depends on what is it that's presented. I think the indication is there's significant fire in the attic of the main fire occupancy, and that's going to be an issue. The Delta One, I think we could probably deal with that in a fairly straightforward way if we can get up inside there either with a hand line or a fog nail and get some water up into the side that's closest to the main fire occupancy. But again, it's a matter of okay, which am I going to pick? And my concern would be is if we try to do both, that we may not do either very well.
Yeah, that's true. No, it's a pickle. But given that both had gone into the attic space, so even Delta side has gone into the attic space.
Yep.
Yeah. If I thought that the main exposure, it could be that case that on the main exposure in the attic on that first original fire, that the siding of the attic is started to burn off, or has burned off. So there's actually access with a hand line to basically bounce water into the attic from the gable end. And in that case, it might be able to control that attic fire. I don't mean extinguish, but I mean control it from going bananas just with a hand line from the outside.
Yeah, it's possible. One of the challenges is that if, and again, it looks like there's probably a vent there's a vent in the gable end of the exposure. Could be the same thing in the let me go back and take a look at this. I don't have a good angle on the main fire occupancy, but that's possible. But the degree of penetration that we would get from the ground into the gable end, the stream likely would hit the trusses and would be dispersed, so it wouldn't penetrate all that far.
Not at all. I thought my thought was if it actually burned off, like if it started to become a larger hole, so you can basically we call it high side. I know we call it when you go the.
Yeah,
I don't know what you call it. Lobba.
Yeah, and some of that depends on what the wall is sheathed with. If it's got wood sheathing underneath, then that would be unlikely. If it's got vinyl over some plastic foam insulation, then that's possible. That would be exposed, and definitely if you could get some water up into that space, it's going to have a positive impact one way or the other.
In the UL study, they pulled the I don't know what we call it in the base of the attic.
Yeah, the soffits. This house doesn't appear to have those type of soffits.
Right.
That's one design for the edge of the roof. The other is with it's got blocking that has some holes in it. But they're not that large, and the dimension of the lumber that's used to seal the end of the rafter space is 2 inches thick, or 50 millimeters. So it's a little bit more difficult to apply water from the eaves in that particular case and have it have as good of effect. But definitely as those hand lines get in there, for them to sweep those eave lines and to try and get water up into that attic space to the best they can, because that's going to have a positive effect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not well enough in building construction in the United States, but that might be an option at least.
Okay, well, there's another video of incident operations. I'll shoot that up here. This is a little bit later in the incident.
Do you know how much later? There we go. The side is gone there.
Not exactly, but it appears that looking at the initial frame that it's exactly as you said. The sheathing and the siding had burned off, and there is some place where you could get some water into that attic.
And we have a rock and attic fire in the side also.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, that was not positive. So now, I would guess this is at least 5 minutes later, maybe 10.
Oh, at least.
Maybe 10.
At least, possibly.
So, but that, I mean, when you have that opening in the attic, if you put a 2.5 inch and get water up into that attic space, you can do a lot of good with that big of an opening. Now you have a fairly good access point to that attic.
Well, and one of the things with that, it appears that over here, that the back side of the roof, at least right here, might still be intact. But in order to hit both sides of this, you're going to need a line here on the Alpha Delta corner, and a line on the Charlie Delta corner to get water on either side of that.
Yeah, definitely you need to move around or have two lines, but I would say it's possible to. I'm not saying extinguish, but I'm saying control it more than it is right now.
Yeah. And it appears in this case that there's still fire in the back on the Charlie side that hasn't been dealt with yet. Oh. Which again, if we still have fire on the outside, that I now have energy that's going from the exterior up into that space, it's going to be much more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, but I could tell you that hose line going to the side, that's not doing much.
No, well, and again, the thing is that if you look at the angle of that, the stream, assuming that the vent on the gable end it was melted away, that's probably hitting about here, and most of the water that's going in is going to be hitting the trusses. It's not going to run the length of the attic because of the nature of the truss loft that's up there. So it's not really going to get an awful lot in that.
That's I would almost say that's a complete waste of resources.
Yeah, probably a lot more effective if that line was to get inside of this Delta 1 up here on the second floor and. At least from what we see here, we're not seeing a huge amount of smoke coming out of this thing. Probably would be fairly straightforward at this point to get up there and control whatever extension into the attic that we had in that.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I mean, even if you don't have enough resources to really attack the attic fire, at least it would be much more sense to get a piercing nozzle up through that roof and just have water mist up into the attic. At least then you know that the attic is not going to light off.
Yeah.
And
what I don't know is it could be that they have people up in the second floor. We can't see that.
I mean, we're discussing hypothetically now that what to do if we had one crew or more two crews and so on. Yeah, I mean, 10 minutes into the incident in normal Swedish context would be maybe when the second unit arrives. So you would have 5 people, pretty much 10 minutes. I would say that that's a fairly common unless you're in a bigger city. So you would be 5 people up until, again, 10 minutes. So you would, in that case, you might have a fog nail in each of those attics just slowing it down, and they're just flowing while the firefighters are doing something else, maybe trying to control it from the other side, from the outside.
Yeah, as we get a little bit later in this, and it looks over at that Delta 1, it appears that they do have a little bit more going on up there. And we can see there's no hand line going inside, but it appears that they at least have gotten inside and done a primary search or something, because I can see a firefighter outlined in the doorway. But we do have dark smoke coming from the gable end closest to the fire, and we've got a little bit of dark smoke coming from the other side.
Yeah.
So a couple of other questions.
Would you go in that point when you're here? Would you consider that house being a hazard now for collapsing somehow? That house to the left, the main occupancy.
Well, I think there's a hazard of roof collapse up here. I don't think I would be so concerned over here or about a wall collapse, given the nature of the construction. I suspect that unless the fire gets extinguished, that you would see this roof would burn off before you would get a collapse of the entire building, because this is platform construction. So in this case you've got a slab of concrete, and then you basically built a box, which is the first floor, and then you built a box, which is the second floor, and then you stuck the roof on top of it. So they're a little bit more independent of one another. So where the fire is just in the attic, I would mostly be concerned about if there was a collapse, it would be a little bit more localized. You might have some pieces falling off, so I don't know that I'd want to be right next to the edge of this wall. But I don't think you're going to see a catastrophic collapse of the whole building.
So you would still say it's safe to operate inside it, for instance, doing it unless search and rescue is done, or operating pulling ceiling. I don't support pulling ceiling, but doing something about the attic from the inside.
Yeah, particularly on this side over here. Yeah. I think over on this side you've got quite a bit more compromise, but there's also a lot less above your head to fall down.
Yeah. What would be is tiles, like concrete tiles, very uncommon in the United States? Because they are really heavy.
It depends on what part of the country you're in. This appears to be asphalt shingles.
Yeah.
So
I've seen a lot of asphalt shingles in the United States when I go there.
Yeah, when you go to the Southwest, you find Southwest and California, you find tiles a lot more commonly. We have some in our district, and also when you go to places in the Northeast, some places here in the Northwest, you also have slate roofs, which they have a similar appearance to the asphalt shingles as far as how they lay on the roof. But they are also very heavy, and when they break, they can come off kind of flying like a frisbee, which is a bit of a problem because they're heavy and they're made out of stone.
Yeah, I mean when you have like you said a tile roof, when that collapses, it doesn't take the whole building with it. But if you're below it on the upper floor and in the inside walls collapse, that's a lot of weight that comes over you.
Yeah.
You're gonna get
again. I I would probably avoid working in the area that had been compromised.
Yeah.
The other side, you probably have an opportunity to do
Yeah.
some work.
Okay, move
And
on.
definitely in this
Oh,
this Delta
absolutely,
one.
absolutely.
So, a question kind of going back to the photo: Are the firefighters in here operating in a safe position? If we look at the kind of standard definition of collapse zone, and we say this is a defensive job, we're conceding this building, then ordinarily they would want to be 1.5 times the height of the building away from the building. So by that definition, the answer would be no. If we look at the specifics of this building, and I'm not entirely sure that from a fire behavior and building instruction perspective that I would say that this is defensive. It might be defensive from a staffing perspective, but from a fire behavior and a building instruction perspective, I think that this probably I'd still classify this as a working fire.
I would just move the people. I guess I don't really see them being very useful in that position between the house, because I would rather have them from a longer distance away, because the angle of attack becomes better up into the attic space for the main occupancy.
Yeah, I agree. I think the question was, are they safe, not if they're
absolutely.
effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree that I don't have a problem with firefights being between those buildings yet.
But they, I think the guy that's in the driveway in between the two, not particularly effective getting water up into that attic. I think an exterior handline stream is not really going to be best choice for dealing with that. I think in that case, getting some water into that attic space from the inside, whether it be with a handline or a fog nail, depending on what people have available to them, would be a lot more effective, assuming that you have enough people to operate offensively inside that space. And I don't know how many people they have on scene.
But it's interesting. I mean, you could say that I have no idea why that firefight is there. Maybe they because one option would be to protect exposure, meaning that we have a lot of radiant heat coming from the attic on the main exposure, main fire, and you protect the exposure by putting water on the facade, not really getting water into the attic. That could be done with something from the inside of the house. But in that case, in this particular case, I would much rather have that stream directed on the main fire instead, because to take that energy away take that energy away already at the house, rather than just protecting exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
But that is not a given. I mean, that's a very situational dependent. Like, I don't see that there's a given answer. Because sometimes you can't be in a position where you're being effective at the main occupancy, or in that case the source of the radiation, but you can be effective at protecting another structure from the radiation.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, if you can take the problem away, you should probably do that, and if you can't, for whatever reason, then you need to keep it from extending to the next occupancy.
Yeah.
And then question 10 is kind of what we've been debating about all along, which is if you started off in defensive in both, should we shift to offensive once the exterior fire and the main fire occupancy and exposure have been extinguished, and then what would impact that decision? And again, I think it comes down to fire behavior, structural stability, and how many people do you have? If you have enough people to operate offensively in both buildings, then that's a possibility. If you don't, then you're going to have to pick.
Do you know about the Dutch model about the 4 quadrants?
Yep.
Which we didn't have in Sweden, but in this case I would classify it as, in that case, let's say it's a resource problem. You don't have enough firefighters to really go interior on both those two fires. it would still be an offensive fire, but it would be an offensive exterior fire.
Yeah.
Meaning that the intent is to go inside, but we don't have the manpower yet, or the fire condition doesn't allow it for maybe another reasons. But the intent is to go inside.
Yep. And we would just simply call that offensive, because offensive is not about where you're at.
No, yeah.
But yeah, in the Dutch model, that would be very clear. You would probably start out in exterior offensive, and then you would move to interior offensive in one or both, depending upon your resources.
Yeah. Oh, it's a good. I like the model. I like that clarified intent.
Yeah.
So I like it.
So then question 11 talks about the eve attack, and again, it's one of those things of the eve attack is really to a large extent predicated on the presence of soffits and the ability.
Soffits are the actual thing sticking out.
It's the bottom of it.
The bottom of the eaves.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, in many buildings, particularly many buildings with vinyl siding would have vinyl soffits. And if you get a fire in the attic and you start to get a little bit of elevated temperature there, those soffits will melt out, and that's good for the fire in a sense that it provides an ample source of air. But it also makes it a little bit easier that even if I can't reach the soffits to pull them open, that they melt out and I can get some water up in there.
Yeah.
And
you would never find soffits that are made of plastic. At least I don't think so. So it's very hard to get water up that path. There's always these mesh for protecting against animals, and the gaps are fairly small, so it's hard to get that water up. I've tried to a couple of houses when we burnt them, but it's very hard.
Now, when we've got wood soffits, it really comes down to, is it a first floor or second floor? If it's a first floor, we may be able to get a hook up in there and pull the soffit off the bottom of the trusses. And if it's on the second floor, now it becomes a much more difficult task. It would take a lot longer. You'd need to use a ladder of some sort in order to accomplish that. So in this case, the houses don't appear to have soffits, and on the side where the exterior fire was, I probably would still sweep the eaves. Just in the outside chance that there were small openings, we might be able to get a little bit of water in there, but I wouldn't be spending a whole bunch of time on that because it's not likely to be effective given the design of the construction.
It really was a shame that they didn't do water mist on the UL study. I thought that was sad. Well, they did water mist with a fog going up there, but yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that because I know that they did purchase some fog nails. They did give that some thought, but it was just a matter of, okay, well, we only have so many tests, and we're going to use the tactics that anybody in the United States can do.
And it's understandable. I mean, again, like you said, it's about testing what we are doing and comparing that, and when we get more money, we'll test things that we're not doing.
Yeah, indeed.
So it's understandable. It was just that it would have been fun to see that.
Yeah. And then question 12 looked at if you were gonna go offensive in one or the other of these, what would be the most effective method of fire control, and what tactical assignments would be necessary to accomplish that. Yeah, and again, I think that the interesting thing with this question is it really comes down to what tools do you have to work with. If you're in Central Whidbey or Laramie County Fire District 2 in Wyoming or Loveland, Colorado, you're probably gonna see some fog nails used. If you don't have those resources available, then then you're probably going to need to use a standard hand line to put some water up into those spaces. And there the challenge comes down to being able to get water on the burning surfaces at the end of the day. So some of that is probably going to involve putting some water up in there through an opening to try and take some of the energy out of that, and then eventually is going to involve opening that ceiling up to get water on the rest of the burning surfaces once you've darkened the fire down.
Well, I think it's also interesting to look at. It's just if you do that, if you have the ability or the prioritize that to get early up with some kind of extinguishing media from the inside. You might do that with one single firefighter, accomplishing that if it's smoke free. But if you wait for a longer period of time, they maybe start filling up with smoke in the occupancy spaces, even though there might not be fire. But if you fill up with smoke, eventually, at least for the Swedish system, if it gets too much smoke, you can't operate there with just one single firefighter. You have to be a whole team. Which takes a lot more resources, and you can't really see if there's a lot of smoke. That also slows progress down. If you want to do, move up and make a small hole and put a hose line up there and do that hole. So to wait with those actions, if you have the opportunity, to do it earlier is going to be more problematic the further along you go in the incident, because the same job will take a lot more resources when they start to fill up with smoke.
I would suspect that here in the United States that most of us would send two people. Again, part of the challenge is that based on our occupational safety and health regulations, I suspect that even if it was a clear space, but that could change, we would be expected to have two people working together. So again, I think you could make the argument if it is free of smoke. It's a non-IDLH environment that you could operate differently, and I might be willing to make that argument. But I suspect that probably most of us would send two people to go do that task. That does double the number of people that you take. But interestingly, I think if somebody was going to put a fog nail in through the roof, they probably would think about that being perfectly fine with one guy up on the roof sticking it in and the other guy on the ground, but probably would think very differently about it putting it in from below. I don't know that for sure, but I suspect that some people might look at those two things as being very, very different. I guess my concern would be is if you send one person inside to put a fog nail through the gypsum board ceiling, is that if you have a section of that ceiling fail and expose the second floor to the fire, now you've got one person there by themselves, and that would be a little bit more problematic. So I would likely send two people to do that task, but I definitely can see where having one person operate in a clear space would not be particularly problematic as long as conditions weren't going to change substantially.
And I agree. I mean, I would prefer to send two people just because it's so much easier to work. They would be much faster and so on also. But it would be allowed and to do that in Swedish context as long as it's smoke free, and it would be up to the responsibility of that firefighter to make the assessment that, well, it's starting to become more smoke and so on. Let's get out of here. But it's up to the officer in charge also to make those decisions that what is okay or not. what we haven't, what I realize now, what we haven't discussed is pressurization, because that would be, along with actually doing something about the fire, is protecting the occupancy space. To put a fan, I would have put, as long as those occupancy space, there wasn't any breach of fire, both of those two occupancy spaces would have a fan placed there if we had two fans. So they would be under pressure.
I suspect that this one probably has a breach in the ceiling.
Yeah, at that point you probably had a breach, and in that case I would not pressurize that house, but the other house definitely. And earlier, before that, I would have that house pressurized, like in this moment. Now I wouldn't. In this case, I would prioritize to get water on the fire, but when the bulk of that fire is knocked down, I would try to get a fan in place to protect the occupancies from smoke.
Yeah, and in looking at this from my perspective, I would say possibly the Delta One, because I think at this point in time we've got very limited extension into that space. Yeah. So if you created an outflow, if there is a breach or leakage into that attic space, if you created an outflow, it would be probably would slow the development of fire as far as extension across that attic space. I'd be a little bit more hesitant in the main fire occupancy, simply because I suspect, given what I know about the construction, that there's likely to be a breach in that space, and I would be concerned about the effects of that.
Yeah, I would. That might be
not so much
with your construction, but if I would take that as a Swedish house, I would definitely put that on the pressure. But again, that would not be my first concern would be to knock the bulk of that fire down, and of course we discussed that earlier, to make sure that it's free from people. You would have someone run around that space and make sure that it's empty. But again, after that, there would be a fan in both of those houses, I would assume. But I guess if I start anticipating or actually confirming that we are getting breaches into the occupancy part with fire, now I will start maybe become hesitant. It's not definitely the first, that because you would rather have a breach and an increased fire conditions on the attic than having smoke through the house. If I think I can save the house. Mm-hmm. With that going on, but again, it's of course a priority. If I think that, well, I might lose this house, it doesn't really matter if I save the 2 floors from smoke if it's going to burn to the ground 10 minutes later. So it's of course it's about priority. But if I think I can save it, I want to keep that smoke free, even if it increases the fire conditions on the attic if it burns through. It's a But like if I had to teach this to a fire officer, I would say as soon as you get a breach, you would turn the fan off.
Yeah.
But if I go beyond that, I might still keep it for time.
Indeed.
Any more questions? Was there anything left?
Nope, that was the last question. Had to do with how would we control it if we decided to go offensive, and we kind of wrestle with that.
I think the main things I would like for this kind of incident to change in the Swedish service would be, or at least ensure that we treat this as initially a big fire, big water, that you pull at least 2 inches 3/4, or I would prefer if there was someone pulling a 70 millimeter, 2.5 inch. But we haven't those pre-connected and so on, so that would take a lot more time. So I probably wouldn't pull that. But if I had a system where you could easily deploy that one, I would. To knock that down, I would like to see that change.
And I think that's one of the things that's an advantage with the way that that our apparatus is set up is that we have 2 inch 3/4 and 2 2 inch lines that are pre-connected crossways, and then we've got a 3 inch pre-connect off the back with that small ground monitor, and also the remotely operated master stream on the top that is also directly piped from the pump. We have multiple options as far as how we can get water quickly on this in varying amounts, anything from 150 to over 1,000 gallons a minute.
Yeah, and like we have booster lines that are pre-connected, and some departments have pre-connected 1 3/4. But they've been going away for a long time. I would hope that people are trying to keep them, but I don't know actually. But the majority is that we have donut rolled 1 3/4 that are easily accessible, but they're still not connected. You have to roll them out and so on, and then you have booster lines.
Yeah, I think with hose that's in a hose bed, whether it's pre-connected or whether it's just simply dead storage that you can stretch out and then connect to the pump. Both of those are quicker than carrying the hose in rolls that you have to unroll and connect all together.
Yeah, a lot of times it is. I mean, I would love to have rolls too, and I would love to have the Cleveland load for a lot more. And there's a lot of fire departments starting using the Cleveland load, and that's sort of good. It's not a pre-connect, but if you need to carry it somewhere, it's a very fast way of deploying hose in a manageable way. But you still have to connect it to some place where you drop it, and again, that could be a pre-connect. You connect it to.
Yep.
And for that matter, our standard is the church, as you know, the water divider, and that's always pre-connected, or it's still. I think I could say that still it's always pre-connected. So you pull that off, and you have that divider, and that's where you roll your hoses out and connect them. It's not that much slower than a pre-connect, but it is slower. And again, we don't have an option, or at least we don't train on deploying anything bigger than that in a hurry. I mean, I've never trained on that in my entire career. Not once pulling a 2.5 in my entire career. I don't think I have pulled a 2.5 inch on a fire like once, I think, on a defensive fire, but that was it, I think. Then at the end, when I did training, I at my station, we did a little bit of training with 2.5 inch, just how to actually hold it, nozzle forward style, which is great, be able to handle bigger lines. But that was not the norm. That was the exception. I'm not the norm. Mm-hmm. Okay, do you think we're done with that one?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting one. Again, I don't see we having so much of a disagreement here on how we think we would run it. It's mostly up to what kind of staffing you have. I think that's most of the problem. I could anticipate someone saying that, well, if you only have 3 firefighters, you would do search and rescue first, and you just ignore the fire. Let's take it this one. Just before we end this one, let's say that the conditions are exactly as you see here, but there's a window on both the D side and the main occupancy, and there's smoke. There's at least smoke extension through the houses, so they're starting to fill up with smoke. And you arrive at night, you don't know if people are outside or not, so you have the unknown of people being home or not, and they're starting to fill up with smoke. And the question is simply, would you still go for fire attack, or would you now say, let's just do a quick search and rescue? assuming that you would arrive with enough people to do search and rescue.
I would say that for us, we'd still put water on the fire. It probably would be the pump operator that was doing it.
Yeah.
But we definitely would want to at least access both houses and determine if the people are out. That would be a priority. But I don't think that I would look at that at the exclusion of getting water on the fire.
You would have two in, and the pump operator getting water on the fire, and the officer doing his officer stuff.
Well, we would have, in this scenario, we would have three.
Yeah, yeah. The officer, the firefighter would go inside, and
the officer would be having a look. The pump operator would probably place his master stream in operation to darken the fire down, and then as soon as in fact, the officer may, if the buildings are clear of smoke, attempt to determine if anybody's in there as he's doing his 360. If they needed to be searched, as soon as the firefighter came up, you could accomplish that task. Again, assuming that the apparatus operator was supplying water to the fire to slow things down. That would be operating in our regulatory context with 2 in, 1 out. And the officer and the firefighter could go in and do a quick search of the houses.
So in my context, it would be, I would hopefully, let's say that the houses were not just light smoke. Let's say they were not super heavy smoke, but they're starting to fill up with smoke, so you can't really see good. We don't have an option to go in with a limited crew or something. Like you can have with 2 in and basically 1 out if there's a problem, but you would have 2 out. But so we would have to, in that case, commit 1 firefighter to darken down the fire, and then commit 2 firefighters inside. For instance, the main occupancy officer and the officer outside, and 1 door person. But you would have to do that. We can't do it otherwise. But if there was light smoke, you could probably get away with saying that, well, there's no fire risk yet. This is only a smoke risk. It's not a fire risk. So there's no risk that smoke becomes fire, at least at this point. Then you could probably get away with sending 2 firefighters in with a hose line, not having the door person outside, and the officer could do that, and they could run over and look at this secondary house. Maybe it's possible to do that. It depends on what the risk assessment the officer does at the scene. In this case, I would probably not do that. If there was a lot of smoke in the house, I would probably commit to searching the main occupancy with the 1 crew, and then support them with exterior streams to try to knock that down. And hopefully we can search the main occupancy fairly fast, and then switch over and search the de-exposure. Maybe. Sort of like that. Okay.
It would be a lot handier if we arrived at this and we're going to have 30 some odd people in.
Well, yes, and that creates other challenges. But I think this discussion is much more interesting to see, like when we really have to prioritize. Again, if you arrive with 5 people and the next 2 minutes you got 5 more, and the next 2 minutes you got 10 more. That becomes a coordination problem and so on. But and you still have to prioritize. But it's still I'm not saying we take it to the extreme, but because the reality for most firefighters are that you're only a very few amount of people at the early stages.
Indeed.
Okay. Always nice talking to you, Ed.
Okay.
I'm going to go and pick up my kid at kindergarten.
All right. Well, I'm going to get ready for work and have some breakfast and off to face the day.
Nice talking to you, Ed. Bye-bye.